January is divorce month in my industry. I'm a marriage counselor, and we know that more divorces are filed in the month of January than in all the months combined. There's lots of reasons for that. It's the holidays coming. People don't want to ruin Christmas or don't want to make their kids sad right before the holidays. And so they hold and wait and then usually file in January. Most of the people who are being served divorce papers are often really surprised because they may have known that something was bad, but maybe they didn't think it was that bad. And so what I want to do is take 1 week for the month of January to cover divorce month. This week, I want to talk about the person who is contemplating a divorce. If this is you, you're very much not alone. Lots of people struggle with whether or not they've married the right person. It's something that's bred in our culture of happiness being number one and taking care of yourself above all else. And so when we're unhappy for long enough, we'll question whether or not we are with our soulmate or whether or not it's the right relationship for us. I never thought I'd be that person, but my story's everywhere here. And if you take some time to read that, you'll see that I was the person who wanted out of my marriage. And this is somebody coming from a family history of no divorce and it actually being a taboo. And I still got to the point where I wanted out of my marriage. And so now that I know what I know and looking back, I see the pitfalls. I see the thinking that got twisted in there for me. And so I just want to talk about that and give you some tips on whether or not you should go or not. Now, that's not to say that every marriage can and should be saved. If you're in a relationship where there is active physical violence, extreme emotional abuse, or a lot of sexual infidelity or untreated addictions, if you're in a relationship where that's going on, you may very well be someone who should be running to an attorney, but you probably wouldn't be waiting until January to make that happen. The ones who are stuck because they're vacillating for a long time. Should I stay or should I go? So let's talk about that for a minute. There's pros and cons to both. I tell clients a lot that marriage is hard, divorce is hard, and you have to choose your hard. But there are signs that will let you know whether or not it's time to look a little deeper. So if you are someone who divorce feels like it would be a relief, that it would be freedom, that you're feeling suffocated, this is probably more about you and attachment issues than it is about your relationship. That's not to say your spouse doesn't have attachment issues as well. If that's how you're feeling in this relationship, you will take those same dynamics with you everywhere you go. I've even seen it affect parenting. Some people are like, I feel suffocated by my husband. I don't want to have anything to do with him anymore. I feel like divorce would be a relief. He's too needy. He's too whatever. As long as I have my kids, I'm happy. But eventually those same problems end up putting a wedge between them and their children too. If you're feeling things like, I love him or her, but I'm not in love with them, relationship goes through phases, all right? Normally, developmentally, you're going to go through phases. And one of those phases is feeling just like that. And if you don't know how to work through that situation, you're going to get stuck there and feel like, oh, I fell out of love. If that's where you're at in this, I highly encourage you to stop and take a breath and be willing to look more internally about what's going on in this for you. If you can name all of your partner's flaws, but you can't come up with an equally long list of your own, you are not looking at things clearly. You know, in every marriage, the dance is at some point to try to find out who's the right one and who's the wrong one, who's the saint, who's the sinner. And most marriages, there isn't one. There isn't a saint and a sinner. And getting an idea of how you're participating in that and what that looks like for you is going to be really important for your own personal growth and what makes you relational to others. Most of us, we don't have great relationship skills. We just weren't taught them. We didn't have them role modeled for us. When we start to get unhappy, we start to focus on our partner's flaws, and that becomes all we see. Every time you come up in your head with something that your spouse is bad at or is a criticism of your spouse, I want you to do two things. I want you to write it down, and then I want you to write a positive to offset it. And then I want a third column, and I want a criticism of you. What makes you hard to live with? That's pretty humbling. And it kind of takes you out of that one-up position of, I'm the victim here. My spouse is really the one who's all this and all that, and I'm doing the best I can, and it's never good enough, and I can't make her change, or I can't make him change. And so try that little exercise and see how out of balance that you are. Every relationship has three parts to it that are really important to understand. One is the developmental. What developmental phase are you in this relationship? Because every marriage has its phases, and you've got to know where you are in it and then how to get out of that into the next one. Because when you start in this wonderful in love, I love you feeling, and you can get stuck in that we're fighting all the time. We can't agree on anything. We can't have a conversation or work out anything without a big blow up. To the next phase, which is feeling more cold and distant and living like roommates rather than partners or lovers. But you kind of come together and go apart and come together and go apart until you get to the later stages, which is really security and safety and feeling like whenever you're in trouble, the relationship is not at risk. Whenever you disagree, the relationship is not at risk. You feel that secure with your partner. And so that's part of the developmental phases. The second leg of the module in working with couples is brain and neuroscience for two reasons. One, the brain is where memories are stored. And if you don't know how to be proactive in making repair and making it quickly with each other, you're going to create a lot of negative memories that will override the positive. And you can get to the point where you actually don't remember anything positive, and it's all very negative. The other reason the brain's important is it is the emotional regulation. People think about emotional regulation usually in the terms of my spouse blows up and gets angry all the time. That's definitely part of it. We call that hyper aroused. But there's also hypo aroused, and that's when you shut down, freeze, withdraw, stop communicating, stonewalling. And when you're in either of those places, you're in a really unhealthy place that's very non-relational. And more than that, your brain has hijacked your ability to actually negotiate, talk, be logical, and come to reasonable solutions and conclusions. And so you have to learn how to stay in that zone of tolerance or get yourself back there quickly so that when you do interact with your spouse, you have the best chance of having a successful outcome. And then the third leg is what we call attachment theory. You can give me a list of some traits of both of your parents and the environment that you grew up in, and I can tell you pretty much what your attachment style is going to be. But once we do nail the attachment style, I can tell you what you're feeling, what you're thinking, how you're reacting or not reacting. Not because I'm a mind reader, not because people aren't unique, but because it's like a thumbprint, right? It's unique to you, but it is a thumbprint. And it is formed by the things that have happened or didn't happen in your past. Attachment theory is not about blaming parents for screwing up your life. It is not. And thank God for that, because I have a 23-year-old and a 25-year-old, and I can go down a pit of shame for all the attachment wounding I know that I've done to my own children. There are no perfect parents, but it's just about being aware of how you were formed and wired and how to deal with that with your partner and how your partner deals with it, and then how your partner was wired, because this is your gut knee-jerk reactions, and you can choose to do something differently once you're aware of what's going on and why it is. So when you do the work of should I stay or should I go, it's probably work that you want to do with your spouse if you can. and with somebody who is truly qualified to work through those relationship issues based on those three models. The work is effective, and if you're showing up ready to learn and willing to stretch and grow yourself in this, then you should have some really good success and a lot of great insight into who you are and why you are or are not relational. And the same for your spouse. I am so grateful that I stopped and put pause on divorce and really looked at myself in this process. I'm so thankful my husband was patient and also willing to look at himself. And we realized that he wasn't the bad guy and neither was I. We just were hurting. And so I want you to know that there is a way out. And before you blow the whole thing up, it is worth the effort of looking deeper, even though it's harder and it may seem like a lot more work than you want to put into it. Because like I said, choose your hard. I hope this was helpful to you. If you've got any more questions about it, all you have to do is send an email to askkim@themarriageplace.com, and I try to answer all of the questions that come through and give a more detailed response to your particular situation. Check in with us the next 3 weeks because we're going to cover different topics about divorce. Next week, we're going to talk about when your spouse wants a divorce, but you don't. So I hope that you'll join us.